very powerful and evocative, but it reminded me of the first time that I'd heard this phrase used. It's used by French Canadians to refer in French, le grand dérangement, to refer to the removal of a native population, the Acadians, from the Canadian maritime provinces in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. And this is also sometimes referred to as the expulsion. And these people who were forcibly removed fell prey to various illnesses and disease, death, and so on. And they were more or less sort of wiped out as a consequence. And their derangement means removal, displacement. So it struck me that there is a curious resonance with what you're saying in general about the way in which Western imperialism has kept populations in subjection and poverty and imposed lack of development upon them. And on the other hand, this illusion, this insanity, which has gripped us all so that we are blind and deaf to climate change. So,
yeah. I would never use the word development because it's perfectly clear that what we have thought of as development for a long time is actually exactly the opposite of what it claims to be. In fact, it's so clear now that the only sustainable life that was possible on, say, the American Great Plains was the kind of life that Native Americans had, which was one of nomadism and so on. Now they've exhausted the aquifers which underlie it. The entire agricultural system over there is going to collapse. So, what we've actually enjoyed for these last 200 years is this strange, mad period of what you might call a sort of carbon derangement. We thought it was always possible because carbon gave us the impression that it might be possible to continue to live like this forever and that everybody could share this life. But everybody cannot share this life. That's really the one thing that's so completely evident at this particular point in time. And yet we continue to act as though that were a possibility.
On this rather depressing note of anxiety and apprehension for the future, may I open this up to the audience with your permission? And we'll take just a few questions because Amitav has a flight to catch, burning more carbon. But anyway, could we have questions from the audience? Please identify yourself if you would like to ask a question. And keep your questions short, if you would, please. Is there a, yeah?
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Shomo Bang from the Department of Life Sciences. I talked with you earlier only about, my question will be related to the novel The Hungry Tide, of course. I was very excited when I was going through the novel because I was mesmerized by the research work you put in the book about the river dolphins. I was amazed. I couldn't think that someone from your background would come up with so extensive research on this that I was totally mesmerized with it. So will you please tell me that how you went about with that research on the...
Certainly, it's very nice of you to say that, but actually, I think novelists have always tried to understand the subjects they write about. Melville, did a lot of research on whales, and there are whole chapters of the book, which are all about of Moby Dick, which are really the state-of-the-art science of marine mammals in the mid-19th century. So, I think it's absolutely the case that novelists do take an interest in these things and do research. So, my research, I love doing research. I find it very exciting and interesting. In this particular case, the way I set about it is that I contacted various marine mammal specialists. Most of them never bothered to write back, but one did, and she was wonderful. She's an Australian marine mammal specialist, Helene Marsh. She put me in touch with a student of hers, a New Zealander called Isabel Beasley, who was doing a survey of marine mammals in the Mekong, from, if you know central Cambodia, from central Cambodia to Laos. So I went there. I joined Isabel in Krache, which is the town where she was then living. And I accompanied her on this marine mammal survey. And that taught me an enormous amount, really, about marine mammals, especially about the Irrawaddy dolphin, the dolphin that I write about in The Hungry Tide.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There was a question here. Yes.
Yes.
So thank you for that brilliant session.
Thank you.
I'm Mahasheta from the Department of Sociology. So as an author of non-fiction who is primarily known for his work of fiction, which though also largely mediates between fact and imagination, how do you deal with criticism that might arise with regards to the claims made in your works, research claims?
I don't think that I ever make research claims as such, because I think when you're writing fiction, in choosing to write fiction, you really give up your right to make truth claims. So I don't think that I'm trying to make claims based on my research as such. And I wouldn't expect anyone to engage with them as claims, because I mean, if people are critical of them, I think they should be. I mean, of course, everyone must subject anything anyone says to, to scrutiny.
I'd like to add to that our friend Alessandro Vescovi, whom you know very well, has actually a paper on the research novel in which he uses you as a major example of somebody who writes something that he calls the research novel.
Oh, really? Oh, I must look it up. And
I'm Proma from the Department of History. My question to you is about Glass Palace. So the most of the characters in the book, it's very easy to get yourself attached to them. And then you mercilessly kill them off in a span of 20 pages. And and then you moved on to completely different place. It's not even in Burma anymore. And you get about 10 minutes or less to get yourself closure about the characters you killed. So I find it personally, I need time to get over favorite characters who die, and then in that book, everyone dies. So how, as an author, do you find it difficult to detach yourself from the characters you create with so much care, or are you clinical about it?
It's very, very difficult when a character dies in a book. It's completely wrenching. You spend such a lot of time with these characters, and then, when the arc of the novel demands, something, you just have to follow it. But it's incredibly wrenching. And so one of the effects of that really was. One of my regrets in The Glass Palace, I think, when I ended it, is that I felt I could have gone on writing that book for years. So when it came to writing another historical novel, which became Sea of Poppies, I did go on writing it for years. I wrote it. I've written it. I spent 10 years and more on those books. And you'll be glad to see that only very few of the major characters die.
Thank you, sir and ma'am, for that wonderful conversation. I specifically, for some unknown reason, like that bit of the conversation about the Adam Smith problem. So, and I would like to focus, and my question focuses a lot more on such an issue. We live in a world of Snowden and WikiLeaks today, where information has become so important a part of our life. In that sense, and you also talked about the way literature could serve as a means of representation of certain aspects of existence, which might again disrupt our illusions of God being in his heaven and all being well with the world. I would like to ask you, sir, what the function of literature in these changing situations and in this age where information has become so relevant is, because even when we talk about parliamentary procedures, legislation, for example, we see literature being used more for its ornamental value, where people, even parliamentarians for that matter, propose something and substantiate it with two or three lines from a poem. So it's has a substantive value. So how important is the incidental aspect of literature? How incidental is literature to the aspect of information today? Thank you.
That's a very interesting question, really, because you're right. We live. I think the internet, and especially social media, has disrupted the world much, much more profoundly than any of us ever anticipated. I mean, that's what President Obama said recently. He had no idea that the Facebook and Twitter and things which people basically thought of as non-serious. The degree to which that these things could actually disrupt our world. It's certainly been the case in India that long before anybody expected, it really determined the last election. It's also been the case in Turkey, and it was absolutely the case in the recent U.S. presidential election. The question there is that it's what do you mean by information? I mean, do you mean like a fact-based discourse or just something that parades as information? Because what we see now with the internet really is exactly this. Now everyone's complaining about it, but fake news, misinformation. And actually misinformation is much, much more powerful on social media than information itself. So, here we really we are entering a field which is, I don't know, it's something that certainly nobody has experienced for a very long time. We are entering a period like those of, say, the Black Death and so on, when people's existence really was so closely tied up with rumor, with unknowables, and with all sorts of fantasies, and So we are entering a period. I mean, everybody knows this, but we are entering a period of profound, I think, instability, and profound uncertainty. And that uncertainty is coming from so many different directions, that we just don't know where we are heading. But one thing we do know is that this kind of information is actually a deeply destabilizing thing in the world today. Misinformation about climate change gets cycled around just as much as information does. It really makes me wonder, whether 5-10 years from now, I mean, the outrage you hear on, say, in the American establishment or the European establishment, the outrage about misinformation and fake news, suddenly they seem to be saying that, China really was very forward-looking and in putting in controls of these kinds of information. And I think it's almost inevitable that the world will have to move in that direction, because it's clear now that this kind of information, if it circulates in this way, it will really destabilize all institutions.
Are there any other questions? Look, since you put your hand up, we'll take your question, but that has to be the last one. Yeah, thank you. If you please keep your question very short, thank you.
Good evening, sir and ma'am. My question would actually be related to your book, Countdown. There, one does get the feeling that you were critical of the development, quote unquote, of nuclear power. So what would your reaction be to India most probably in the future becoming an NHG member?
India's been a nuclear power without necessarily being a part of all these circles. But again, it's an interesting thing that you asked that question, because one thing which became perfectly clear to me in researching Countdown is that India's approach to nuclear issues is essentially very Brahmanical. That the whole idea of it is to belong to certain status groups. And that's why there's this intense focus on NHE or this or that. It's all about status. And in fact, K. Subramaniam, who was one of the leaders of this nuclearization, he told me this. He said it's all about finding a seat at the table. So that is what it's about. It's not about power. It's not about any sort of means end relationship. It's about finding acceptance in who you think are the top people in the world. This is what I mean by it's very much a sort of what can you call it? It's really a Brahminical approach to the world. So after NHE will go, there'll be some other NH this, or there'll be PCP or some such thing. There'll always be, because that place at the table doesn't really exist. It's a fantasy. It's just, there's always something is greener on the other side, so you've got to run after it.
Professor Lohia, please.
I'm Anuradha Lohia. No, just identifying myself. First, on a very personal note, I'd like to thank you for one delight you have given me over your entire career as a writer. We've often read fantastic books by different authors. They write a monumental book, one book, two books, and then there's a very long pause in which we as a reader are deprived. So thank you for not having long pauses.
Thank you.
It has been a sheer delight to just walk with you down your career path, down your imagination, down your research.
Thank you
Like
so
my
much.
other life science students, The Hungry Tide is definitely my favorite.
Thank
I
you.
think we were all, you transported us. You showed us how biology becomes fictional, romantic. Really, romantic is the word I'm looking for. Because sitting in a lab, we get romanticized about our discoveries at a very minuscule level. But you sort of made it big. And you made it real big. So thank you for The Hungry Tide, and thank you for continuing to feed my hunger. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's so kind of you. Thank you very much indeed.
What I also wanted to make a comment on, that although you're probably being realistic, though I hope your realism is wrong, in 20 years, Presidency will continue to be here.
So do I.
And we have just invoked the 3rd century. And, our 200-year motto has